expected conditions. So I'm going to take a step back here and kind of give you a little bit of history or chronology of this project. It kind of went in sort of two phases or iterations. The first phase of this project used previously identified reference basins that mainly came from a lot of James Falcone's work, who developed the gauges database, which is available now and has been available for a while. That effort mainly focused on mean monthly flow. And as well as that, they wanted to evaluate different sort of modeling methods to see which one was the best performing, if you will. Phase two is the one that I've been most involved with. So we had this suite of reference sites from the first phase, but when we wanted to try and build a greater spatial network, I'll show you some maps in a minute here, but additionally we wanted to try and get additional stream flow statistics that we're looking at, so not only the mean, but the minimum, the maximum, and the median flow monthly. And then we also wanted to use this information to predict out these conditions to all the stream segments within California. So this is the phase one, if you will, reference basins around the state. So you can see we had 163 reference basins around the state. Reasonably good coverage of the state, but still 163 is not really that great when you're talking about as big of a state and as diverse of a state as California, but still, this was the first phase of this. In order to make some sense of this, we grouped these sites into regions for regional models. And these regions correspond to Obernick level 2 ecoregions. So you can see the majority of the state is in this xeric region, as most of you know. The other two regions were the interior mountains, which is mainly the Sierras, and then the North Coast Mountains. So for most modeling, what you're interested in is to see what your performance is. I'm going to go through and show you a series of slides that highlight model performance. This simple sort of graphic here gives you an indication of what model performance is. On the y-axis is discharge for this stream, and the x-axis is the years, and the open symbol is the observed flow at that site per year, and then the closed is the expected from the model. And so the relative proximity of that to each other, or the ratio of that, gives you observed over expected. We heard Chuck talk about that a lot in his previous talks and earlier today. In this case, this was a pretty good model for this stream here. So the mean over E is close to 1 here, and that's what's desirable in terms of model performance. So values closest to 1 are better models. Values that depart from that are less good models. So as part of that phase one, there was an effort to compare different modeling approaches. And again, so what we have here is on the y-axis is the mean over E value. And we've got 6 different modeling methods here. And the two that performed the best were the cubist and the random forest models, followed by boosted regression trees, and then followed by the other 3, linear regression, neural networks, and support vectors. So from that effort, random forests were selected as the primary modeling technique for predicting natural flows. And we're not the only ones to use random forests. It's become pretty widely used in ecology and in other fields. And some of the reasons that they are used is because they are free of assumptions. They allow both nonlinear terms and then terms that have interactions. And they're fairly resistant to overfitting as well. So here's the model performance from phase one. And so we have the mean over E on the y-axis, and then on the x-axis is month, going from January to December over here. And each one of these represents a regional model for that month. And the top line there is a mean over E of 1. So you can see, in general, most of the monthly models did pretty well. We had some departure in the fall over here for the interior mountains here that didn't perform as well, but generally speaking, we thought we did pretty well with this. So moving now into phase 2. We wanted to try to add in more reference basins. And one way we did this was we went back into the historical records and looked for inactive current gauges that are currently inactive to try and find gauges with at least 5 or more years of record, post-1950. And then we also looked for situations where a gauge may be active now, but there's some sort of hydrologic modification that's occurring now, and look for a period of reference in its history of a period of record that were referenced, if you will. And I'll go through some examples of that. So this first sort of, I guess, data mining exercise, if you will, we went through and screened the potential 1,400 gauges around the state. We looked for sites that had 5 or more years of data since 1950. We examined the monthly flow data. And then we verified the lack of existence of any major land use in terms of urban or ag, or any hydrologic infrastructure in terms of dams in the watershed. So a couple examples of this. So this for this site here, we utilized the portion of this record here from 1963 to 1979, highlighted in here in this light blue box, as the reference period for this watershed. So this gauge has since been discontinued, but we were able to use that history of this gauge at the site. And so here's another example of where using a discontinued gauge that had relatively reference condition, and we were able to use the full portion of that record there. So now moving to the other technique to get reference. So we went back and examined the USGS annual data reports and looked for information about when hydrologic modification may have been started in a watershed, say there was a dam put in or there was some increased plumbing in the watershed or something like that. We examined the monthly flow data, and then we verified the lack of any major land use in terms of ag or urban, as well as dams. So this example here is for Clear Creek near Igo, which is an area that I'm pretty familiar with and spent a lot of time on. This blue portion of the graph here is before the Whiskeytown Dam went in 1963, so we're able to use that period of record as a sort of reference for this watershed. So from those efforts, we were able to get a total of 254 reference gauges around the state, and we felt like we filled in the sort of spatial network a little better. Just kind of toggle back and forth for you here for a second, but you can see we were able to fill in it a little better there. So in terms of performance, and this is for just the xeric region only, the first bar is the phase 1 mean monthly flow, and again, mean over on the y-axis, months on the x-axis. And then in phase 2, looking at mean, minimum, and median values here. By and large, we did pretty well, not as well as we did in the first effort, but there's kind of a trade-off between model performance and spatial network that you're trying to cover. So just gives you a sense of that. So in terms of trying to use these model outputs to examine natural temporal variation in stream flow, you can do things such as this, where you estimate the flow over time, and this is what the estimated natural flow is for this stream here, Cucamonga Creek. I'll come back to this creek in a minute. But one of the things that's probably of large interest to this group and other regulators and managers is to be able to forecast out across the whole NHD network. I know that, in terms of ephemeral streams and non-perennial streams, it's a really big deal in the West and certainly in California. This particular plot here just shows the frequency of natural flows in April above 0. We have a hot to cold sort of situation here where the hot is approaching 0 or no flow, and these are for NHD segments in the xeric region. Another way of kind of summarizing that is that under natural conditions, roughly 19% of these segments have flow in April. So you can kind of use this in a management scenario and planning for monitoring efforts. So now then, applying this to streamflow alteration, in the case of a dam or some other plumbing feature. Again, this is a schematic here. On the top, we kind of went through and figured out what our reference is, or expected rather. And then if we look at a watershed that says it has a dam on it, we figure out what the observed is, and then feed that into the model and come up with an observed or expected. So going back to that Cucamonga Creek site, this is pretty typical of arid streams, certainly in the west and Southern California, where the expected flow is a lot less than what you get now because of recycle return flows and things like that. So this is an example of using it for kind of streams that are being augmented by return flows. Here's an example using this sort of model data in conjunction with bioassessment data. And this is from some work we did in the Sierras. On the y-axis is the California Stream Condition Index. And then on the x-axis is the amount of flow alteration in the month of March. So how much flow is altered in the spring, if March is a good surrogate for spring. And as you see, is one is the value here on the x-axis where the flows are closest to what's assumed to be there naturally. Those are the same values that are produced the highest California Stream Condition Index or stream health value as well. So kind of a pretty good fit there. So just some caveats and limitations of this. We're using fairly limited dimensions of stream flow here. We're looking at mean, maximum, and minimum, and you're going to keep those in context. The other thing is that the model performance is varies quite a bit between the month that you're looking at, the region, and the flow dimension. And lastly, but not leastly, the spatial coverage. The limiting factor here really is the spatial coverage of the weather stations relative to the stream gauges. And with that, I'll stop and thank you for your time and take whatever questions you might have.
Where's our microphones?
Hey, Chuck.
Hey, Jason, great talk. That
Thank
was
you.
really neat stuff. I did notice on your random forest models that, at least for some of the examples you showed, that there was a consistent but small over-prediction rather than a symmetry between under and over. Do you have any sense of why that's happening?
It's a good question. Under prediction, or you say over or?
Over prediction. So in your plots, a lot of your bars were slightly below 1.
Right.
Throughout time. So that indicates some sort of systematic bias. And you'd expect that to occur for some sites so consistently, but you'd also expect under prediction for other sites consistently. So I'm just wondering if it's just a matter of the examples that you pulled out? Or?
Yeah, I think one of the things, one of the slides that I had in reserve was kind of a box plot of precipitation over the time of the studies, and then comparing the first phase and the second phase, kind of the distribution of precipitation. And they match up pretty well, but there is, kind of this inconsistency of the relative position of weather stations relative to the gauge. So I don't know. I mean, that might be it, but I feel like, I don't know. I mean, something to look into, I guess.
We've observed some similar phenomena using random forests for similar kinds of modeling, and maybe we can chat offline.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Chuck.